This topic is called domain of a rational function, and the directions say the function h is defined below. H of x equals x plus 2 over x squared minus 1. And the directions are telling us to find all values of x that are not in the domain of h. If there is more than one value, separate them with commas. So we're talking here about the domain, and whenever we're talking about the domain is all of the x values for a particular function. So the domain is all of the x values. So we want to find all of the possible x values, and the easiest way to find all the possible x values is to figure out which ones do not work. So we're looking at this function, and the only places where x would not work is where we have this denominator equal to 0. Anytime we have something divided by 0, it's not defined. So we need to make sure that we find all of the possible values where x squared minus 1 is equal to 0, because those will be the places where this function is not defined. So we need to figure out where that denominator is equal to 0. So any place where that denominator is equal to 0 is going to be undefined for this particular function. So in order to figure out what the values are for this binomial here, x squared minus 1, we can factor. And we know that this is a difference of squares. So we know that x squared minus 1 factors to x minus 1, x plus 1, since it is a difference of two perfect squares. And we know that if we multiply those two together, we get something that is equal to 0. So now we're going to use the zero product property, which says that if we take two things and multiply them and we get 0, one of those two things actually has to be equal to 0, one or the other. So we know that either x minus 1 could be equal to 0, or we know that x plus 1 could be equal to 0. So then we're going to solve both of these for x. We add 1 to both sides for the first one, and so we know that x could be equal to 1. That's one possible thing. And we know that x could be, subtract 1 from both sides, x equals negative 1 when we're solving this. So what that actually means is if you were to plug in 1 into our original function, we're going to get something that is undefined because we get 0 in the denominator. And if we were to plug in a negative 1 into our original function, we would get the same result. We would get a 0 in the denominator. So we know that in the end, this function is defined for every single x value except for 1 and negative 1, which is what we solved for here. So when you're writing your answer in here, you need to make sure that you separate it with commas. So you would have a negative 1, a comma, and a positive 1. I hope this helps, and good luck in finishing this topic.